a little voice in my brain that was like, we absolutely need to be reading this right now. So that's what I'm doing. I did get caught in the rain with this. I love women consumed by an inner violence. I don't really care. Nuts! In such a good way. I would like that. Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but it has been a while since I've spoken to you guys about books. So I thought that I would just do kind of a chill, cool, normal video, briefly talking about what I'm reading right now. And I did just return from a bookstore. So I have some books that I could show you that I just bought as well. So I think I'll start with what I've been reading and am currently reading and am going to be reading very soon. And then we can get into the books that I just bought. So the first thing I'm reading is really random. It's this book from a series that I literally read when I was a child, but it was one of those where the series came out when I was already kind of too old for it. And then I obviously just kept aging as one does. And then by the time all the books were out, I was already like in college. So now I'm like, oh, what if I circled back to this random ass series I read when I was a child and finish it now? And part of that is because there are new covers that are like being re-released because the copies that I was reading when I was a kid are no longer available. So I was like, okay, if I really like this series, I want to be able to have the older covers. So I went out and bought all of the old covers from secondhand book resellers. Anyway, all that to say, I'm reading the Five Ancestors series. So I already finished Tiger, Monkey, Snake, and Crane. Right now I'm in the middle of Eagle. So yeah, this is like a middle grade series where we have these children who are kung fu masters and they all have different animal styles of kung fu. And this was marketed as being similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I loved and still love. So I think when I was a kid, I read like the first 3 and they were pretty good. Now, coming back to it as an adult, it's not great. You know, it's fine, but obviously I'm gonna finish the series. So yeah, I'm in the middle of Eagle. I'm almost done with that. And then I have the last 2, Mouse and Dragon. So yeah, I'm sure when you clicked on this video, you weren't like, I bet Sam's reading a book series for 4th graders. But I don't know, there was just like a little voice in my brain that was like, we absolutely need to be reading this right now. So that's what I'm doing. So I'll let you guys know more about my thoughts in my next wrap up, but that is something I'm reading right now. And then kind of on the total opposite end of the spectrum, I'm reading this essay called The Weird and the Eerie by Mark Fisher. So I think I picked this up because I saw a random quotation from this essay on Instagram and it really stuck with me. So it's literally just an essay about what it is about the weird and the eerie that are so intriguing to us. And as a reader who really enjoys horror and unsettling stories, this piqued my interest. So yeah, I'm reading it, I'm annotating it. I did get caught in the rain with this, so literally days after I bought it, it was like, cool, let's have some water damage on my brand new book. But yeah, I thought it would be kind of cool to read this essay and understand more about why I like the weird stuff that I like. Okay, and then I also have a little stack of library books that I'm going to be getting to once I'm done reading these. So the first one is Betwixt, which is a horror manga anthology. This is kind of misleading because this looks like Junji Ito artwork, and that's because he did the cover artwork. But this is actually a story collection of a variety of different authors. And while Junji Ito did the cover art, I don't think he actually has a story in here. So I think it's a mixture of Japanese and Western authors. The reason I got this from the library is because I'm not sure I'm actually gonna love it. If it were a Junji Ito collection, for sure, would have been like an instant buy. But I wanna make sure I actually like it before I buy it. And then another manga I picked up from the library was Solanin by Inio Asano. So I have liked 2 out of the 3 things that I've read by Inio Asano. So I'm really hoping that I like this one as well. This is, I think, probably pretty similar to his other works where we're following this person who is trying to figure out how they fit into the world, who they are as a person, why they can't just be happy, those kinds of things. So this time it looks like we're following a recent college grad who's working in an office job she hates. Her boyfriend's crashing at her apartment. She struggles with the feeling that she's just not cut out to be a part of the real world. So I think this is hopefully gonna be a slam dunk for me. Okay, the next one from the library doesn't have a dust jacket. It's really uggo, so I'll just put the picture up here. But I got Asylum Road by Olivia Sudjic. I don't exactly remember what this is about, but I've heard that this book is supposed to be really anxiety inducing and really tense. So, okay, yeah, I had to look up the synopsis because I don't actually remember what this is about. So we're following a husband and wife. The wife is preoccupied with what she feels is a relationship on the verge, unequal, precarious. The husband is reserved, stoic, gives away nothing. As the sun sets one evening, he proposes and they return to London engaged. But planning a wedding does little to settle Anya's unease. As a child, she escaped from Sarajevo, and the idea of security is as alien now as it was then. When social conventions forces Anya to return, she begins to change. The past she sought to contain for as long as she can remember resurfaces, and the hot summer builds to a startling climax. I don't know, I feel like I wouldn't have necessarily picked this book up just based on that synopsis alone, but hearing from someone else that it's like really anxiety inducing, I would like that. And then the last library book is a book that I'm reading for book club. That is The Foxwife. So I think this is like a murder mystery with like Chinese mythology. So I think this is kind of centered around the Chinese myth that foxes are like ghosts that can go around collecting people's souls, I guess. And that foxes can shapeshift into like beautiful women and whatever, bewitch men. So we're actually following a female fox who is currently transformed into a woman. And she's on a quest, I think, to figure out who murdered her child. And then at the same time, there are weird murders happening around the city that she's exploring. So I think it's like a blend of like mythology and murder mystery set in early 1900s China. So yeah, reading this for book club. We'll let you know if I like it. Okay, so that's what I'm reading. Next, I'll tell you about the books that I literally just bought an hour ago. So I had rewards, I had 2 gift cards, and no one to stop me. So I have some spoils. The first one is one that has been on my radar for a little while. I mentioned in my classics video that I've been wanting to get back into reading more philosophy. So that kind of spurred me into moving this to the top of my list. So that is The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti. Thomas Ligotti is a pretty famous horror author. I've actually never read anything by him, but this is his foray into philosophy and specifically the school of pessimism. Drawing on philosophy, literature, neuroscience, and other fields of study, Ligotti takes the penetrating lens of his imagination and turns it on his audience, causing them to grapple with the brutal reality that they are living a meaningless nightmare, and anyone who believes otherwise has simply fallen under the spell of an optimistic fallacy. So I think this is obviously going to be pretty pessimistic, pretty dark, literally focusing on being forced to live as like this traumatic event and this nightmare that none of us actually really chose. Yeah, I think I'll definitely have to be in the right headspace when I read this, but I am always really intrigued to read from new like schools of philosophy, and pessimism isn't one that I've really dipped my toe into too much, so we'll see. I definitely like read the first page at the bookstore because I was like, okay, I need to make sure that this isn't going to be like too over my head or kind of too far left field for me to be able to relate to. Yeah, the first page seemed promising. I'll let you know if I love it or hate it. Okay, and then next was Spontaneous By. This was not one that was on my list. This is not an author or a book I've even ever heard of. And it's blurbed by the 2023 International Booker Prize judges, but it's not clear to me if this was actually a candidate for the 2023 Booker Prize, because it doesn't say. But anyway, that is Whale by Myeong-Kwan, and this was translated from the Korean by Chi-Young Kim. Usually my approach when I am looking at a book that I've never heard of is I really actually won't read the synopsis too deeply. I'll kind of like skim the first couple sentences, and then really what I look for is there an epigraph? Read that for sure. And then read the first page. And I think that has really served me well, and I can really get a pretty good vibe of if I'm gonna like a book or not. So this book did not have an epigraph, but the first few lines of the synopsis and the first page were just like, nuts in such a good way. So synopsis. We meet Chun Hui as she returns to the scene of a crime she may or may not have committed. She drinks from a spigot, clobbers the head of a large snake, and eats it raw, slowly, stopping only to spit out cartilage. In its belly was a frog. She eats that too. Cheon's story widens to embrace a motley assortment of characters, many of them motivated by lust or vengeance. That's where I stopped. So then I was like, that sounds crazy. Let's look at the first page. Like, I need to be sure. Chunhui, or Girl of Spring, was the name of the female brickmaker, later celebrated as the Red Brick Queen upon being discovered by the architect of the Grand Theater. She was born one winter in a stable to a beggar woman as the war was winding down. She was already 7 kilos when she emerged and plumped up to more than 100 kilos by the time she turned 14. Unable to speak, she grew up isolated in her own world. She learned everything about brickmaking from Mun, her stepfather. When the Inferno killed 800 souls, Chunhui was charged with arson, imprisoned, and tortured. After many long years in prison, she returned to the brickyard. She was 27. Okay, I am very freaking hooked. Like, yeah, and I will be reading it and letting you know if I like it. And then next was one that was on my list. I've read 3 other things by this author, loved them. This is the last of their works. So that is Augustus by John Williams. This is admittedly the book of his that I feel the least amount of pull towards because it's very divergent from his other writing. So in this book, John Williams is recreating the Roman Empire from the death of Julius Caesar to the last days of Augustus. And I'm not gonna lie, like, I don't really have a ton of memory of like Roman history. I know there was that meme of like, how often do people think of the Roman Empire? I never ever think of the Roman Empire. So yeah, I don't really care about the Roman Empire, but I love John Williams and I want to read all of his books. So that's what I'm gonna do. Next is one that I wasn't planning on buying, wasn't on my list for the day, but then I found it and I was like, I'm gonna get it. It's a classic that I want to read, and I talked about it in my classics video. So that is The Blind Owl. Really pretty cover too, and I didn't realize it was such a shorty. Like, this is literally only like 87 pages. I also read the first page of this. I honestly think I just read like the first couple sentences, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be buying this. So for those of you who don't know, this is about a narrator who has a very tenuous grip on reality. He's high on opium, drunk, he's hallucinating and explaining to us what he's seeing. And then I think like halfway through it transitions, so the reader is now reading from a different perspective. So basically we go back to the beginning from a new perspective, and I think it like really is at odds with what the first person was telling us. So I'm very intrigued by that, and I'm gonna read it. Next we have one that I honestly thought was gonna be in horror, but it was literally just in general fiction. So I'm like, okay, like, cool. That's fine. It's interesting to me what gets put in horror. Like Monstrilio was in horror, and I don't feel like that should be in horror. I think that should just be in general fiction. But then this is like super disturbing and messed up, and it's just chilling in general fiction. But anyway, this is The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. I think this is gonna be like Tampa by Alissa Nutting. We're following this man who is a convicted pedophile, and he begins a correspondence with a 19-year-old woman who I think empathizes with him and is also most likely a pedophile. So I think it's gonna be like a very disturbing relationship that builds and obviously is like very toxic. I'm imagining them being like, no one understands us, we're just different, you know, like that kind of thing. And while this was on my list, I wasn't sure if I was like gonna actually get the vibe to buy it today. But when I opened it up and saw the epigraph, it is a quote by Lewis Carroll that says, "A stopped clock is right twice a day." So I just feel like that gave me the right vibe of like, this is gonna be so messed up, and I think these people are just gonna be like so delusional and think that there's nothing really wrong with them, and they're just like ostracized by society. I have heard from other people who I trust that they really liked this, so I think this is gonna be like a double-handed slam dunk for me. Okay, next is one by Catherine Lacey that I did not know existed. So that is Nobody Is Ever Missing. This came out in 2014. But I was confused because when I picked it up, it says author of Biography of X. And I was like, no freaking way, did she already come out with another book? So I think this is just like a, you know, new edition or whatever. Yeah, okay, this is her debut novel. And the only other thing I've read by Catherine Lacey was Pew, which I thought was pretty good. But again, reading the first couple pages of this, I was just like really sucked in and I wanted to keep reading. So I was like, okay, Catherine Lacey, like, yeah, I'll read your debut novel. This is about a woman who, without telling her family, takes a one-way flight to New Zealand because she is haunted by her sister's death and consumed by an inner violence. She conceals her growing rage so expertly that those who meet her sense nothing wrong. I love women consumed by an inner violence. I love reading about the human condition and people spiraling. Makes me feel less alone. But yeah, this was just like jumped out to me and my heart told me to buy it, so I did. Okay, and then last one is another spontaneous buy. I always pull out NYRB classics, even if I haven't heard of the book, just because I feel like they're usually bangers, honestly. So the art's always really cool, and then yeah, it's literally like hand selected, like, guys, these are really good books. So I feel like NYRB hasn't really steered me wrong, so we'll see. But anyway, I picked up Berlin Alexanderplatz by Alfred Döblin, and this was translated by Michael Hofmann. Never ever heard of this book, this author, none of it. Kind of a long one too. A little bit of a commitment I got myself into here. Another unique thing about this is that each chapter has like a little summary of what the chapter is gonna contain, which I thought was kind of interesting. It reminded me of Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Each chapter had like little keywords and like little blurbs of where the story was gonna go, and I'd never seen that done before, so I was intrigued by that. But we're following a former cement worker and hauler, Franz Bieberkopf, in Berlin. And as our story begins, he has just been released from prison where he did some time for some stupid stuff. That's literally what's written here. It's not even me ad-libbing. Now he is back in Berlin, determined to go straight. And then basically the story proceeds, boop, 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 and let me guess, he does not stay on the straight and narrow. And then the first page was just really captivating, and I wanted to keep reading. He stood outside the gates of Tegel Penitentiary, a free man. Only yesterday he had been on the allotments with the others, hoeing potatoes in his convict stripes. And now he was wearing his yellow summer duster. They were hoeing and he was free. He leaned against the red wall and allowed one tram after another to pass, and he didn't take any of them. The guard on the gate strolled past him a few times, pointed to the tram. He didn't take it. The awful moment was at hand. Awful. Why so awful, Franz? His 4 years were up. The black iron gates he'd been eyeing with increasing revulsion. Revulsion? Why revulsion? For the past year, swung shut behind him. He was being put out. The others were inside, carpentering, varnishing, sorting, gluing, with 2 years ahead of them, with 5 years. He was standing at the tram stop. His real punishment was just beginning. That is freaking interesting. It's interesting because I picked 2 books, Whale and this. It's like our character is literally just getting out of prison. This is so different, but it's still so like intriguing to me. I was just instantly hooked. I'm excited to see where this character goes, what this character does. I like the writing. I think I'm in for a good time. Okay, guys, so those are some books I'm reading. These are some books I bought, and I'm going to also probably be reading very soon. And that was like my little catch up. I did not mean to be on such a long hiatus. It usually doesn't happen intentionally. I kind of just get caught up in other things. And then I'm like, oh wow, it's been like 4 weeks since I've uploaded a video, and it would feel good to create again. So as always, very excited and happy and grateful that you guys are sticking around. You could like this video. If you wanted, you could comment some things, like what you've been reading, if you've read any of these books. You could watch my other videos if you want. You could subscribe. Hope you guys are having a good spring, reading some bangers, DNFing some stinkers. Thanks, guys. Love you. See you next time.